Hi, everyone. Welcome back, as you can see, live on video now to the Precursive podcast. I'm Jonathan Corrie, co-founder and CEO of Precursive. Welcome back for any of you rejoining. And for those joining for the first time, this is my kitchen. I'm delighted today to be joined by Rav Dhaliwal, who is from Crane Venture Partners. Welcome along, Rav. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Jonathan. And I'm coming to you from my garden office. So there we go.
Exactly. How often, don't lie, how often is that exercise bike getting used?
Oh, that's just purely for the look. It's actually a cardboard cutout.
You're one of Peloton's customers who bought one and then is never going to use it.
Yeah, it's not actually a Peloton, but that's a whole other story for another time.
Yeah. How's life? Are you well?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Apart from being cold, it's busy but good.
And you were just saying you've got a new puppy in your life. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, for a couple of days, my wife and I have finally taken the plunge and got a gorgeous little cockapoo who has upended our entire existence. So we're just trying to figure out. So thank goodness for the garden office where you can just lock yourself away and actually get on with some work.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely that. You know, those shoes that you've got down there, you're going to need to get those on a higher level.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to get eaten.
Yeah, we've agreed she's going to avoid the office for a little while.
Excellent. And so in this season, as we were chatting about in sort of preparations for this, and spoiler alert, everyone, I do actually prepare. We've been looking to bring some outside perspective into the conversations that we have around SaaS and customer success and professional services. So in season 3, we've been talking to people that are from the investment community, for example, authors, writers in and around this space as well. So you've got a storied career, so perhaps you can share with us a little bit about your background. For those that haven't heard it, it's great.
Too kind, Jonathan. So yeah, I sort of semi-jokingly, as you know, refer to myself as a recovering software executive. I think it does take a little while to recover from being in a couple of startups. So yeah, I pretty straightforward background. You know, I've been in software for about 25 plus years. I started my career in large global multinationals, IBM, Microsoft, you know, the sort of companies that I'm sure everyone's heard of. And then for really the last 12, 13 years, before becoming a venture capital investor, I was very early in a number of startups, one of which got acquired by Microsoft. So I spent a few years actually back there. And the other 2 went public. So I was very early at Zendesk, and I was the first UK employee at Slack. I actually helped set up the UK office and operations, and I actually founded the global success team. So all great experiences, but you do that 3-4 times in a row, it gets very tiring. And so now I find myself actually on the other side, which is finding and working with amazing technical founders and entrepreneurs and investing in them and helping them to build successful companies.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that that operator experience and that frontline experience will give you an authenticity as well as the ability, I'm sure, to, when things aren't quite going to plan, to be like, all right, guys, that's okay. Well, you know, it happens.
You'd have to ask the founders, I guess, about but, my general learning has been over the last couple of years doing this is once you shed the operator muscle of, I know how to fix that, because that's not your job anymore.
Yeah.
I think really what the real value add is not necessarily saying, I think you should do X or Y. It's helping them to avoid the things you know won't work.
Yeah.
I think that's generally what I've learned the most over the last few years of being an investor is actually, I think the major value I add is just helping them avoid common pitfalls. And then the rest, is just kind of supporting them and figuring out the rest. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. Very happy to be doing what I'm doing.
No, I can imagine. And I would, over your career, you've seen the world of computer software and now SaaS, as it's more affectionately known, evolve. And within that, you know, when I was working prior to setting up Precursive, I was working for a large US firm, and we were moving from an on-premise product from Siebel to Salesforce, for example. So saw kind of the was on the customer end of that transition. And how have you seen, that environment of SaaS evolve in recent years? And what role do you see customer success now playing in that evolution?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jonathan. And I think, we often talk about on-premises and SaaS, but I think really that's the distribution model, right? I ship you some DVDs or some CDs, or if you're old like me, it was a box of floppy disks.
Yeah.
Whereas, I just get onto the web and I have access to the product. It's actually a lot more than this, the distribution method. It's the licensing method. It's the capital versus operating expenditure. So what I've really seen over the transition is, as people have changed the distribution models to cloud and SaaS, they've changed the licensing model. So customers are not buying software by and large by making a capital expenditure. They're making an operating expenditure now. That's the norm. And they're not, most importantly, perpetually licensed. And this is what people forget about the on-premises days. I bought the software and I owned it forever. It was mine forever, the licenses. Now people rent the licenses from you on a yearly or sometimes even a monthly basis. So that's becoming the norm. And I think as part of that movement towards being an operating expenditure to being licenses I rent rather than own, the switching costs has got a lot lower. So you talked about your example of Siebel to Salesforce. That would have been a ton of work, right? It would have taken a lot of time, a lot of pain, a lot of effort, a lot of services, probably consultants, etc. Whereas now in this sort of API economy in which we live, switching cost is pretty low, between SaaS solutions. And so the role of customer success or functions that are designed to work with the customer to help them see business value has only grown in scale and importance as that transition towards a subscription model has become the norm.
Yep, I like how you talk about the API economy. I think that's something that's I think sometimes in the world that we operate in, because we operate in the Salesforce ecosystem, so all of our customers are looking to buy applications that are native to Salesforce. Which is great up to a point, but then inevitably, as many of our customers are in the upper mid-market enterprise space, inevitably they're not doing everything on that platform, and therefore they are looking at integrations. And it's interesting, I think even those integration projects now are in this sort of new high velocity era of we want to just plug and play, right? Versus having these extended 6, 9, 12-month deployments, which is something that I want to explore with you in more detail. Going into this idea, so if you think about this idea of like ownership, right? And that the customer's owning the product, inevitably though, it's the supplier that's really got to own the driving of like the value, right?
For sure.
And so you've talked about this customer success as this, like you've written about this as this idea of this continuous sales motion, right? And, sales teams are selling value, right? Implementation teams or services teams are like enabling that initial value or getting to that first value. And then
or standing the solution up so it can deliver some kind of value.
Yeah, exactly. And then customer success is trying to drive that on an ongoing basis. So if customers need to be continually sold on the value of your product, who owns that, or who should own?
Really, really key question, I think, there, Jonathan. And you mentioned the article that I wrote this in earlier in the year was called the Missing Piece of Software Sales. If anyone wants to have a look at it, it's up on Medium. Essentially, what we've done in this transition of on-premises capital expenditure, perpetually licensed to cloud distribution, subscription and renting software, is we've radically kind of changed the way we build and sell and distribute software, but we haven't particularly innovated on the structure of the companies. So essentially what happened is we'll just take everything we did in the old world and then we'll just shove it into the new world and find that, or some of that doesn't work, so we'll bolt this customer success thing on at the end, problem solved. And that, unfortunately, doesn't really scale and doesn't really work anymore. And that's because when we are in a subscription-based environment, we aren't just selling and then moving on. We're in a continuous sales motion. right? So we don't want to just sell once. We want to sell 2, 3, 4, 5 times to the same customer. So because our cost of customer acquisition is high, and so what I posited in the article is that the way we build software companies hasn't really changed much structurally from the last 30 years, because we're focused on just 2 types of sales: inbound and outbound. People come to us, or we go out and find them. But there is actually this third leg, this continuous sales. There's inbound, outbound, continuous. And so in terms of ownership, if you think about what it takes to sell, that initial sell, whether that's inbound or outbound, is it typically will take someone who owns the commercial health of the customer paired with someone who owns the technical health of the customer, typically an AE and an SE, right? Very rare, unless your product's super simple, that you're going to find a really strong commercial person who can also do all the technical security product use case bits, right?
Yeah.
Takes 2 people. Now, if we're working on the basis that, well, the sale never ends, how can then just one person embody both of those skills to continually sell for the customer? We still need commercial skills, and we need product use case technical skills. So what I posited in the article is what we should do to build a continuous sales motion is simply mirror, not the roles per se, but the skills involved in the initial sell. So we've sold, and we used at least 2 sets of skills to do that on an ongoing basis. Now we've sold first time to the customer. Who's going to be the commercial owner? Is it the original seller, or is it going to be an account management type person who's more of a farmer? And then who's going to be responsible for the product health of the customer? The ideal candidate for that is the customer success manager. They know the product, the technology, the use cases, and how to drive business value and adoption. So that long way of saying the answer to your question is, if there's a continuous sales motion, it should be owned by whoever's mirroring the skills in the original sale. And that's typically going to be an account manager plus a customer success manager. And the way you would incentivize them is going to be slightly different, because your CS person, you may incentivize them more towards fast time to value and then on net revenue retention. And their aligned account management person would have probably the same measures, but in different percentages, because you want to maybe drive the new revenue from existing is the largest what they're comped on. Time to value may be shorter, for example, smaller, for example. But fundamentally, if you mirror those skills, the people who are doing the mirroring should own that continuous sales motion. There's a broader argument to be said that actually everybody in the company should own it or have a chunk of it to some extent, because product's job doesn't end when we sell, support's job doesn't end when we sell, marketing's job doesn't end when we sell. So why can't we build in some kind of longer term sales or value metric into their compensation?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. I used to work at a firm called CEB. They wrote the Challenger Sale, for example, you're familiar with. And it was a research firm. One of the things that they were doing was exploring commercial operations and sales and marketing effectiveness in enterprise companies, and they would profile best practices. And I remember one of the case studies was centered on a business which had created, rather than having a compensation structure just for AEs, they had it by pods. So they had like business units.
Perfect, yeah.
That were all incentivized. So sales, delivery, finance, everyone was aligned to this, to the growth of the business. And I think you're starting to see some of that bleed through in terms of like how organizations think about kind of what are those metrics that we should all care about, e.g. NRR. Yeah. The thing is though, I think there's a lot of nuance to this topic because people can be very binary, right? Like some of the people on this show, Ziv Peled, who is the CCO for AppsFlyer, like completely anti any form of commercial responsibility sitting with CS. He's all about value and relationships, and then other people take it.
It's an interesting one because I think I can't speak for Ziv, obviously, but I think there's a general, and we've talked about this, there's a general cultural anathema towards anything to do with money.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure that, I mean, it probably comes from the fact that all of us, no matter what we have done in our working life, have had less than stellar experiences dealing with salespeople, whether that's at work or personally. Yeah. I was on the phone to a company today where I'm going to have to get a refund, right? And it was not an easy conversation. They do not make it easy for me,
Yep.
right? So there is that little bit of an anathema, but I think there's another dimension to look at it from. If you want a seat at the table, if you want to be taken seriously, if you want to be at the board and be a key part in building the company, you are going to have to be showing how you're driving the revenue, whether that's directly or indirectly. And I think CS leaders often think, oh, if I own a number, I become a salesperson. And it's like, but that depends on how you think about sales. You mentioned it at the top of the conversation. If you do sales properly, sales is about driving value. And if you drive the right value, revenue is the outcome. Right? That's exactly the same mission as CS. It's an organization all about driving value. And if they do value right, the revenue is the outcome. They don't have to be the people who orchestrate, do the red line negotiation, do the pricing. If we mirror those roles, they're working as a team to do that, right? So I think that's one thing. There's just a bit of a historical anathema because of just, you know, our own personal experiences. I think part of it is also just going back to the history of how we build companies. There's too much still, even in CS, thinking pre-sales, post-sales. If we get rid of that distinction and say there's first sale, next sale, next sale, next sale, and we start to operate on that basis, then it's okay to have some revenue goal that you're aiming towards or trying to influence, because you're in this continuous sales motion. You're all in it together. You're not doing anything different. Working with the customer and trying to find the best way to onboard them, trying to build multi-threaded relationships. That's actually what really good salespeople do. That's what they do, right? So there's actually nothing wrong with that. I would say that if you don't want to do that, that's fine. If you don't want to be anywhere near money or any revenue, then you really can't complain about not having any influence or any seat at the table or not being taken seriously or not being invited to present at the board. You'll just be in a corner moaning about why sales are really awful and no one understands what you do. And I think that is actually a fundamental mindset shift. Now I'm putting my investor hat on. That needs to happen with CS practitioners if they are not going to be viewed as just glorified support for moving on.
Right. I think there's also, for some companies, like sales is a dirty word. And I think that I ran a session actually with our customer success team, teaching them some of the frameworks that we use in our commercial organization, right? And I have a background in that because I'd worked in the commercial effectiveness practice. So, and I'd helped to build the sales process. So, and one of the comments that came back was, it was like, one of the CSMs said, it doesn't feel like we're being sold to. I said, exactly. We're not doing, it's not when you really know what you're talking about, it's not a pitch. It's not a pitch if you know what you're talking about. It's you're actually helping customers to solve their problems.
We are adding value and working with you and doing good discovery and helping think through the business problem and helping you show how we might be able to solve that problem. And I think there is this allergic reaction because people don't realize that is what sales is. There aren't actually many CS folk or many CS leaders who have had a lot of exposure to the sales process. They might know what it looks like in Salesforce, but they haven't been through sitting. I mean, I've joined companies early enough where I have had to do everything, selling, onboarding, blah, blah, blah. I've sold deals. I know what's involved. And by the way, as a CS leader, I had in my last role a revenue target in the tens of millions. Tens of millions. I did not strong arm customers on renewals, and I did not force stuff down their throat or do things that people think salespeople do. I drove my team to say, what's the way we can drive the fastest value with the customer? So within the quarter, we can come back, talk to them about doing more, right? So, you know, we have to earn the right to sell them more. And we do that by demonstrating value and value quickly. So, you know, I think this idea of, hey, I don't get involved with money or I won't be, the constant refrain I'm hearing is, well, if I have a revenue target, how can I be trusted? And I think that's incredibly disrespectful to salespeople because what you're saying is you are inherently untrustworthy because you have a number, and that's not the case. That's just not the case.
I think in that situation, I would say to them, why don't you ask your client in the next call to ask them this question? I ask them to ask the customer, I carry a revenue target now. Am I less trustworthy as a result?
And it's an interesting thing. It's also really disrespectful to customers, because what you're saying is customers are so dumb that they don't realize that everyone from the vendor has a commercial interest in them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not bright enough to realize that I represent the vendor. If you go on your kickoff call as a CS person and say to the customer, look, we really value your business and we want to earn the right to do more business with you. That's why I'm here. So my job is to make sure that you see that most value from what you bought in the shortest amount of time possible with the least amount of risk and effort. And if I do that, I hope we'll earn the right to come back to you and talk to you about doing more business. I do not know any customer that's going to have a problem. No. Like, I just don't. And I think it's very disrespectful to customers to think, well, if we carry a number, they're just going to assume that we have bad intent. Of course they know you have a commercial interest in them. They're getting you for free.
Yeah, the renewal is a commercial intent, isn't it? So
right. You are here to earn the right to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And you're not even the one who's having the conversation. Again, this goes back to another thing you see in startups all the time. There's a huge difference between accountability and responsibility. I can be accountable for revenue, but not responsible for doing the contracting, the negotiation, the pricing, working with procurement.
Yeah.
You see that all the time.
And so, in this putting your investor hat on, not that you need to, because it's what you do every day now. So with regards to your either portfolio companies or new companies that you're going to invest in, what are you looking for in terms of CS? You've touched upon accountability and responsibility and the differences there. So it sounds like some responsibility and some growth would be in as a part of that.
Yeah, look, I mean, from an investor perspective, it's all to do with what stage the company is at, right? So I spend most of my life in very, very, very early stage. I'm a seed stage investor predominantly.
Yeah. And
that is really all about product market fit, because if you don't have that, you can't build a commercial organization to then become a big company. So there, what you're looking at is not necessarily do they have CS people, do they have a CS function? It's do they have people who maybe actually even in product that are working with customers and learning from them about how they can optimize the product for fast time to value, right? That's what you're looking for at that stage. At a later stage where a company or a business is like, well, we've got really good product market fit, or at least product market fit in a couple of segments of customer. We're now building that commercial arm, sales, SDR, all that good stuff. What you're really then looking for is, do they have, even if it's one CS person, someone whose responsibility is to work with customers to accelerate that time to value, and do they have a definition of what they mean by time to value, right? If their definition of time to value, it's deployed within a 30-day time frame, and there's this percentage of feature or license consumption, or there's these kinds of business outcomes that are occurring in a 60, 90-day period, not a 10-month, 11-month, 12-month time frame. And that's what you're looking for then. And then when you've got a more mature company from an investor perspective, somewhere it's got good product market fit, or maybe multiple products that they're doing very well selling repeatedly, it's like, well, do you have a CS organization that you can draw a line from and shows how it's adding to the net dollar retention or net revenue retention number? Because we know we can build a company with ACV, but can we sustain it now with net revenue retention? Because if you've not got CS people and net revenue retention is 100 or below, it doesn't matter how much money you're piling on in deals, the company's eventually going to grind to a halt.
Yeah. Okay. And so
from an investor perspective is all to do with what stage are they at?
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I think that having been through the very initial startup phase, I remember when we were looking to raise capital from institutions very early on. At that time, we hadn't really nailed our product market fit, and so that was reflected in the renewal numbers. And when I look back on it, at the time, I was always really pissed off because an investor would say X, and they would say, well, your retention number, and I'd be like, yeah, but these guys, they should have done X, and these guys should have done Y. And it was actually much more, when I look back, it was product market fit, which I'm delighted to say that we have now. I think it's interesting though that you still get the majority of the investment conversation is always centered around the revenue organization.
Yeah, that makes sense. It should be. It should be, because you're building the company, right? And that's what's required to build the company.
Yeah.
What a really good investor is doing, and I'm fortunate I work with a lot of very good investors who go, okay, I can see how you're building the company. How are you going to sustain it?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about, how do you become a $100 million company or a $1 billion company, not how do I make maybe a 1.5x return after 5 years of my investment, right? So again, it goes back to, there is now increasing awareness and increasing education in the investment community that there's more than just the commercial variables to look at, the traditional orthodox sales motion. There's that plus what's the continuous sales motion, right? And the really good investors are the ones who are looking at it in totality, saying, yep, looks like they've got good product, looks like there's good differentiation in the market. They look to be getting good traction in selling it. But I also want to know how you're going to sustain that sale and grow that sale. Because in 5 to 6 years, all your new revenue is going to come from the people you've already sold to. The good investors know that.
Okay. And so that you've got these different phases that you've articulated. So when you think about then we talk a lot about, in some of our research, about the anatomy of a world-class professional services organization, or the anatomy of a world-class customer success organization. Like, what are the building blocks and the pillars of that? So from the CS perspective, right, what does that look like in order to scale effectively?
By stage?
Well, yeah, you could go by stage or in general. Floor is yours.
Look, I mean, I think from a CS perspective, I think in order to scale effectively, the foundational things that you really want in place is, first and foremost, you want a very crisp definition of what CS does at the company. If you can't articulate, well, actually, we accelerate value by being change management experts, or we are regulatory compliance experts and we help the customer to drive value by configuring it to the regulations, whatever it is, whatever skills and knowledge you are bringing, you have to first of all have a mission that's clearly articulated and ties back to some form of bottom line number that's important to the company. In the early stages, that bottom line may be, we're here to accelerate product market fit. Later, it may be time to value, but ultimately it should be NRR. There are people who are saying, well, NRR is not a measure of customer success. It's inherently, if a customer wants to give you more money, we're assuming it's on the basis that they've been successful with the first thing that you sold them, right?
A large proportion of it is going to be customer success driven, because it's the renewal number, the upsell, and the
the customer clearly must have got some kind of value from the thing you originally sold them, otherwise it would not give you any other money. Because they can go anywhere else. So let's say it is it's a proxy value for customer success. So I think first and foremost, you've got to have that mission and definition. You've got to have very good alignment with sales, be part of the sales motion, try to avoid having sales handovers. You want to actually have really good data and signals coming at you. So you need really good product telemetry. You need to actually understand that not just how people are using the product, you need to understand what are the patterns of usage that indicate people are seeing value. And then you also need to have that data and signals coming at you so you know when to pick up the phone and make a proactive intervention, right? You don't want to wait till renewal to find out they're having all sorts of issues. You want to be looking at the graph and picking up the phone and going, hey, I noticed that stop using these features, or usage has tailed off 25%. Can I help? What's happening, right? So data and signals, clear mission, alignment to sales, really need strong alignment to product organization, some sort of formalized mechanism that's agreed with product on how you're going to feedback, because product market fit is a continuous thing. It doesn't just end when you've shipped the code. You're always iterating on the product. So I think those are, in addition to all the things that CS leaders are really good at doing, understanding how you want to segment the customers, what level of service they're going to require, because I'm not going to be able to afford to put a person on each account with the best will in the world. What tooling do we need to support that? Are there certain tools that we can buy? There's more and more CS focused, both analytics and productivity tooling that we are going to need in order to service our customer base. So I think those are some of the things I think I would be thinking about from a scaling perspective.
Yep.
The other thing is also, what's your assessment of how complex customers are being? Because it does come to a certain point, especially if you're moving up market, that your CS organization is going to need more specialization in it, more sub teams or parallel teams. Your classic one being professional services, right? We were selling to mid-market organizations. That was great. There are 100 people, 400 people. We could onboard them all with the CSM. Now I'm selling to 20,000 person organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Even multiple CSMs isn't going to work. I'm going to have to put a team on the ground for 3 months, right? That's a signal. I might need more specialization because my customers are getting more complex.
Yeah, I think there's complexity due to the size of the company and the things that manifest as a result of that, right? Like,
and the ambition they have with the product, right? So they may want to integrate it to a level that other people aren't. That kind of thing.
Yeah, precisely. There's the complexity associated with how they buy and implement it, and the oftentimes the security and the regulatory elements around that. I mean, we work with enterprise clients where you can't just ship a product upgrade because they control that, and there's certain windows that will happen on.
Yeah,
right?
and all the integrations have to be tested in isolation with the later version and all that sort of stuff. Yeah,
and like a byproduct of that actually is one of the things we found is like we don't ship product every week, right? We're not one of those types of businesses, but we have a quarterly cycle which aligns to
which is still pretty aggressive, I think.
It is, and actually one of the challenges that you have to manage in that in enterprise is that it particularly in our world, you have to be careful on how you manage that upgrade piece, because you can have clients that fall behind who are in enterprise because of these windows, and then you find yourself in a situation where the best CSM in the world can't negate the fact that you're 3 release cycles behind. And
or we have a 12-week change management process where I have to present this and the backout plan and align the resources. Exactly. Yeah, you're 100% right. A good CS person a good sales motion will be doing, this goes back to the old way of doing things versus the new way. In the old way of selling, we did all the commercial discovery and we did all the technical and security discovery.
Yeah.
We didn't do any discovery around deployment.
Yeah.
Right. We just shifted that along to the next part of the production line, professional services. Who's going to be involved? Do you have the skills? What's the time window? What's your internal change process? Who needs to sign off on this? Do you have the resources? All that stuff. You can do that in parallel when the deal's at 80% done, right? You're on the road to signature.
Yeah.
Start that process in parallel. You're not going to slow the deal down. You'll get off to a much faster start on that services piece.
Going back to the complexity piece, because I know you understand that, like, so we operate in the world where we support professional services teams, right? Now, professional services is inherently complex because you have people, you have projects, you have
process,
you have processes, you've got revenue, you've got margin, all of these different things. So actually, the number of I think there's something around the number of business processes that your customer success team supports, because that drives the amount of like questions and the amount of domain expertise that you might need to have, right? Because you might have someone one day who's asking you about revenue recognition, and another day they're asking you about project management collaboration, and another day they're asking you about capacity planning. And that complexity of the world that you support and the range of problems that you support would influence how the specialism that you would need to have in your customer success organization.
Correct. Yeah.
Over time, right?
Yeah, for sure. So you may get to a certain point where one person can do a little bit of that because they don't need to do it in depth.
Yeah.
Or they may need to do 2 or 3 of those in depth, but the rest, and then you may get to a certain point where the scale of this is so much more complex, or the organizations we're dealing with have so much more complex needs. I might need to think about, a classic example is I might need to build a technical CSM team, because what's happening now is the customers are saying, all right, we get you've helped us with this use case, but in order to do this, we have to build on top of your platform. What's the best way of doing that? And then it's unfair to say to the CS person, well, now you're going to have to become a REST API expert as well. Right? And if that starts to happen in enough frequency, it might make sensible to say, well, why don't we just build technical CSM capability that they can call on for those situations while they're working on, business value use cases.
Yeah, I think though, so it's also why you see the convergence as well between professional services and customer success, right? You talk about technical CSMs. We're seeing increasingly the merging of those business functions, particularly in SaaS, you would have services, Oscar, for example,
yes,
right? So, for example, in her organization, services and success all rolls up to her.
So you raise a really interesting question to interject there, John, is it goes back to have that clear definition of what CS is, because we keep using the role, the function, and the philosophy interchangeably.
Yep.
So CS could mean CSM, CS could mean the whole organization, CS could mean the philosophy of making customers successful. So I like to think about it as the customer organization ends up having many disciplines in it.
Right.
CSMs, professional services, technical CSM, premier support, whatever it is. I tend to think about it that way because it's a broader organization. So I'm not surprised you see that kind of merging. All it is a reflection of, you get to a certain point if you're successful as a business, where what it takes to make the customer successful quickly requires multiple disciplines. That's just it. That's a reflection of.
Okay, and then you've talked as we've been going through here about a number of these different metrics. For example, you've talked about time to value, and we've talked a little bit about NRR, and you mentioned in your anatomy of having this, the data and the signaling, right? So it kind of, I want to unpack, like, from your perspective, like a bit more about some of the metrics that matter. So what are some of those? It sounds like TTV and NRR are two of the key ones for you, but with your portfolio companies, what do you advise them to focus on in terms of like some of the key metrics?
Yeah, so it's a question about stage.
Yeah.
So in that very, very early stage, or even at the stage where you're accelerating and you're growing the business, it's all about time to value. Do you have a definition of what you consider from a product usage perspective is driving value? Or have you got some idea of all my successful customers, the happy, valuable ones that are going to do more business with us, their usage profile looks like this? Because that's really what you want to concentrate on from both a go-to-market but a product perspective. What can I be doing in the product, or what friction can I be reducing, or what can I be adding to help them to get that usage profile as quickly as possible? And I want to do it quickly. Yeah. So really at those very, very early stage smaller companies, it's how can we accelerate time to value? Yeah. Or what roles do I need, or what portion of a person do I need to be working with customers, and what kind of discovery should they be doing and feeding back to the product organization? I think at the early stages, it's always about product. Because if you don't have decent product market fit, if you don't know what the leading indicators are for value, it doesn't matter how much money you invest in sales and marketing. Yeah, it will all end up churning 12 months later.
Yeah, I mean, I think so every year we do a benchmarking survey, which is the customer onboarding benchmark report. Very catchy title. But one of the things that we asked in the last one was centered around how companies define value, right? Because there's all this talk around time to value, right? And what we saw in the research was that you would see things like it's when it's switched on. So it's like it's go live, it's first adoption. This
was from customers. That's what customers.
This was companies. This was essentially probably 400 SaaS companies talking about like how they define it, and it was very instructive that none of it was really customer.
We can do this quicker in our business, cheaper in our business, easier in our business. You know why? They don't measure any of that stuff.
No, exactly. So first value is too often just like it's a go live.
Correct. And it's a proxy for something.
Yeah. So if time to value is of such great importance, right?
It's a great important. Yeah. I would qualify that. It's a really good thing to orient your teams on. Yeah. It may not be that important to the customer. It should be, because they should be busy being a bank, an insurance company, or whatever, and not trying to deploy software.
Yep.
That is really weighted towards what's a good way of driving your CS team in those early stages. I think part of the challenge here is something I call the buyer-deployer gap. Yeah. So your buyers, the people who you sold to, they almost certainly have some business outcomes in mind.
Yeah.
We need to avoid duplication. We need this process to work more efficiently. We need to improve our margin, whatever it is. They've got some business driver.
Yep.
But the problem is, because if we're only doing technical and commercial discovery, the CS organization is not working with the buyer by and large. They're working much further downstream with a bunch of people who the buyer has, quote, volunteered to get this done, right? So then I've got a busy day job, I've got other projects to do, and now I've got to do this Precursive thing, right? So that person probably doesn't have any business outcome in mind, because they've just been given this to get up and running by their bosses, right? This is why it's really important for CS to be part of that sales motion towards the end, to have a relationship with the buyer, to say, what did you buy this for? What are you looking at? What is success for you?
Yep.
So they know what that target is to aim at, because otherwise they're just stuck at the bottom with the users and the implementers who probably have no idea that this is just one extra thing that's been added to the mix of their lives, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, even at the buyer level, a vendor actually can find that the customer has no measure for success. So unless you want to launch a 6-month McKinsey-style consulting gig with them to figure out what is it actually that we are aiming for, it can be very useful for the vendor to say, this is from our experience, we live and breathe this product. These are the proxy measures for success that you want to aim for. Do any of these resonate? Great, that's the one we're going to deliver for you. Because sometimes they don't know. They just don't know.
Yeah. So
my classic one, I worked a lot in collaboration software. You go, what does success like that? You go, we want to collaborate on best practices better. Well, how should we measure that?
Yeah.
Right.
So it's funny. I love that buyer deployer gap analogy, because inevitably in our world, companies are talking about, we want to improve time to value, we want to improve operational efficiency. That will lead to, retention and growth. We want to improve margin, or we want to improve the visibility and predictability of services. These are all the types of things that people say. And so we got into a habit where we would what was in the business case would form a part of that initial engagement, right? And that works with a senior audience, but we changed, correct. We changed it to super simple of when we would meet project managers, or we would meet frontline staff. With a project manager, we'd say, listen, the fact that it takes you 45 minutes to set up a piece of work, we're going to fix that problem. They're like, amazing. Or the frontline member of the team is like, all that shit that you hate doing, like tracking stuff and all the updates that you got to send your clients, we're basically going to save you a load of time. Yeah. They're like, amazing. Right. Okay. I'm all ears. And so I think that there's that, Dave Jackson, who I think you will also know, right?
I know Dave very well, yeah.
Yeah. So Dave talks a lot about you're dealing with people. And I think what CS needs to realize is that the people that you're dealing with, if you can connect with them on a much more human and emotional level, you don't need to worry about all of that, complicated business value stuff, because the emotional side of them is they really actually probably don't care about
that. I would only partially agree with that, because value is whatever the person who's signing the check thinks it is.
Right.
So so you should absolutely deal with humans, empathize with them, make their lives better, understand what they are looking for. But if that does not correlate with the buyer who says, well, this is what I'm signing the check for, then what you've got is a really bunch of happy users on a churn product.
Yeah, potentially. In our world, it's slightly different, because those people have, once they really understand, the reason why...
It depends how much influence they have with the person signing the check. Because if they actually throw their tools up and say, if you take this away, we're all going to quit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Great, you've done your job.
Yeah.
Right? If they don't have that influence, you have to have something that's... I think this is fundamentally the fact that you have these different stakeholders who may have different wants. Yeah. Right? I'm not saying prioritize one over the other. Absolutely don't prioritize the buyer and forget about the users. But if you just prioritize the users and not the buyer, that's equally dangerous.
Yeah, so more what I was getting at is like the emotional engagement that you get early on with like more junior people in it gets them to pay attention to what you're showing them, and ideally leads to them learning,
Yeah, I'm
adopting
going
the
to push
product.
back on that because a CS person or a vendor from the outside cannot drive the change in the company. The company can drive the change. So that's why you should be using your buyer to say, hey, when we kick off with your team, you need to come to this meeting and explain to the team why this is important, why they need to pay attention to it, and why you are really happy that they're going to be working with this vendor to get this done because it's very important to the company. If you're going to try and do that as a vendor, it won't work because that's not how human behavior works. So you need that endorsement. In other words, use your buyer to close the buyer deployer gap for you.
Yeah.
Then you can work on making those people's lives better and building a relationship with them.
Yeah.
There is no point having lots of happy, contented users and no revenue at the end of the year.
Yeah, I don't disagree with your disagreement. What the point that I'm making though is that, well, what I've experienced over my career, not just here but elsewhere, is the ability necessarily for every company and every stakeholder to do what you've described in terms of driving that change and managing it well.
So why can't you build that into the sales process, right? So let's paint a picture for you at deal 80% of what's going to happen next. We're going to send you some comms before the deal signed up. We'd like you to send, obviously you can style this out very differently.
Yeah.
Here's what we need for you at the kickoff. Here's what we need for you in Q1.
Yeah.
This is how you will get fast time to value. Sell them on doing that before you've closed the deal, because here's what happens. Buyers get deal fatigue. It is very complicated to go through procurement, especially big procurement. Once the deal's done, they go, right, I am off to the next thing.
Yeah.
That was a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
Driving internal change can only be done by the customer, but you have to educate them about that's what they need to do, and you have to make it easy for them. Here's a standard set of comms. Here's a welcome thing we want you to do, blah, blah, blah. They may do it, they may not do it, but it's got to be part of your sales process. It has to be.
Yeah.
Because you're not selling software. You're not just selling software. You're selling a change in how people work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the scope and size of that change, if it's big, you are going to have to tackle change management. Otherwise, and you can't impose change from the outside.
Yeah.
It has to come from the inside with your software.
I couldn't agree more. The reason why I mentioned what I mentioned is so that you can, as a vendor, I think if you're able to appeal to both. So what I was saying,
you have to appeal to both, for sure.
Wasn't saying go one the other, but what you are doing, if you can appeal to the rational element, which is often the business driver, and the human element, is where you do have, because inevitably in every piece of work that I've worked in, even when it was large consulting firms driving the change management, there's always a group of people that show up to a meeting and like, why are we here? Right? Because they haven't read the email.
Oh, I don't know what this is for. I don't know why we bought it.
Because they're like,
very busy.
Because they're like, oh, well, you know that email we sent you 3 weeks ago, and they're like, no, I didn't read that. And that's why I mentioned what I mentioned, because then you're kind of, there's this balance of winning the hearts.
And you know why? Because your customer has a very, very busy day job. They are an insurance company, a bank, blah, blah, blah. You live and breathe your software. They do not. Absolutely. Right? That's fundamentally got to close that buyer deployer gap. Yes, you've got to work with the people and treat them as people. Make sure that this is adding value to them. Their definition of value may be different from the buyer, but the buyer is ultimately the person who's going to decide to give you more money on. Ultimately. So, whether it's change management, bridging a gap, whatever it is that you do, it is both constituents need to be looked after. And CS typically struggles with the buyer because they've never had a relationship with them. Once that deal got done, they get shunted down way, way further to people who actually either may not be invested, may have different goals, may have, in a lot of cases, no goals whatsoever, other than to minimize their workload. And so you have to bridge that gap, because if you can't, what you're going to do is get very, very good at selling, maybe good at deploying and onboarding, but you're not going to get good at driving new revenue from the existing customer base. And within 6 years of doing that, you won't be able to add new revenue fast enough to cope with the lack of revenue you're growing from the existing base, and you will no longer be a viable business.
Well, listen, I greatly appreciate you taking the time to join. I think there's some fantastic insights there. I'm just going to
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, John.
Recap a few of them. So I think, you know, for those, again, for those tuning in, I hope you've all enjoyed the show. I think there's a few great insights there that I'll do my best to sum up. So I think when we go back to that, you know, that evolution of the world of customer success and SaaS and CS as a continuous sales motion, there's this piece around ownership that we should all appreciate. And kind of the analogy that I had in my head is like, if you think about a house, if you're renting that house, you kind of, well, no, actually, I'll start with, if you own a house and you own it, most people don't think about relocating and moving every 5 minutes. However, if you rent a house, right, there's oftentimes that when you're getting to the end of your rental agreement of like, should I move? So I think thinking about like the world of SaaS through that lens of ownership is an interesting one to bring into it. I think, you know, as you're thinking about scaling your organization, I love that phrase around building with ACV and then obviously sustaining with NRR. I think, and thinking about how you can put the foundations in for that as early as possible was great. I really like the pillars that you talk about in terms of the anatomy of a world-class CS organization, which was one, having that mission and that definition. You talked about having that crisp definition of like, what are we for?
And how do we add value to not just the customer, but our own bottom line as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I love the product telemetry piece around having the data and the signaling. And then the organizational alignment, I often call it that organizational muscle, which is great. And then the final piece which I think is great, which is, you know, how you can, you know, Oscar, for example, in a previous one talked about customer success starting in marketing, starting in demand generation, for example. But I love that idea of closing that buyer deployer gap and building that into your sales process so that you can better manage these constituencies as you talk.
And I can tell you the people who do that really, really well, some of the portfolio companies I work with that do that really well, what they find is that accelerates the speed of their deal. Because if they time it right, it gets the customer to stop thinking about the procurement. They're actually thinking about the deployment and value. So they go, yeah, look, we've got to do all the stuff. Let's just get on with it, right? So if you do it right, it actually helps you sell as well.
Oh, no, 100%. Because people are thinking, when I push this button, what happens?
Yeah.
So if you're proactively managing that process, then absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Wonderful, Rav. Thank you ever so much.
My pleasure. What an amazing summary as well. Thank you. You've got it all there. It's great. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. If you want to check out more content, head over to the Resource Center on precursive.com. And for those of you that were really paying attention, you'll be able to download the Customer Onboarding Benchmark Survey. Catchy title from there as well. So have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Jonathan.